call the roll.
Alderman Arnett.
Here.
Alderwoman Erickson.
Here.
Alderman Chun.
Here.
Alderman Dankel.
Here.
Alderman Kreinbrink is absent. Alderwoman Inman.
Here.
Alderman Robinson.
Here.
Alderman Ketchum.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. We'll continue on. Are there any audience comments? Any audience comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a motion to adopt the consent agenda as a whole. All matters are listed routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. If discussion is desired, the item can be removed from the agenda and considered separately. They are as follows. Item A, approval of the minutes of the committee of whole of April 21st, 2025. Item B, the regular council minutes of May 5th, 2025. Item C, the approval of the committee of the whole minutes from May 5th, 2025. And the treasurer's report for the prior month that was presented in the committee of the whole. Is there a desire to remove any of these items from the consent agenda? Just a reminder to the new council members, there is no discussion under the consent agenda. You just simply vote. Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Alderman Arnett, is there a second?
I second.
Alderwoman Inman, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, and the motion passes. All right, mayor's report, just that the chief had asked for us to agree on a street closure. That will be Center Street between Green and Main Street. This will be for June 7th for a car show. That'll be by Sidetracks it'll be closed from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And the cars will be parked there. The alcohol will be consumed in the building itself and the business, and they will police it themselves to the benefit of Skills USA and Special Olympics. Is there anyone that objects to that street closure? Okay, hearing none, I'll sign off for council, and I'll hand it back to the chief for the rest of them. There you go, sir. All right, attorney report, Attorney Gottschalk.
I don't think I have anything that isn't going to be addressed later on.
All right, treasurer's report.
No report.
Treasurer's.
Oops.
I'm sorry, I skipped. Clerk's report.
I have nothing.
Treasurer's report. All right, city administrator report.
Just wanted to bring you up to speed on a couple things. Our road program from this past year, that is continuing to hang out there. We still hold a 5% retainage of about $21,000. We're waiting for grass to grow in on some of that and everything, so we're working with the contractor to try and get that taken care of. 724 North Main Street, I spoke with our representative from ComEd this afternoon. He's supposed to get back with me and see if we can move things along. I also spoke with our contractor. He was told 4 to 6 weeks initially. We're at about week 5, 4.5 or 5. So we're trying to push that up so we can get that rolling so it doesn't coincide with the Main Street project. So I should hopefully hear something later this week. Cloud permit, we're just about ready to get to go live. We've still had a few issues with our with e-pay, which is the state's way of bringing in credit card receipts and things like that. So we're working on that, but right now there's over 90 permits already in the system that our staff have put in. So we're gonna work to the point where those can be put in by the people applying for the permits. So that should help us with some of those things, and we're looking forward to that. So that's what I have for now.
Okay, any other questions for Jeff? Okay, city reports. Tony, EMA?
Nothing further, thank you.
Chief Senni?
Nothing further.
All right, council reports. Alderman Arnett?
I have nothing.
Alderman Chun?
Yeah, I actually have something. For our code enforcement officer, can we request him to do like a bi-weekly or monthly report for us? I'm getting calls from my ward on stuff, and then I go to look at it, and it's already taken care of. So it'd be nice to know what he's actually doing.
Sure. I receive one every week. It's just a matter of, you know,
Can you just forward it on to us then?
we can do that. I'd like to find a more concise way to do it through
Yeah.
code. I'd like to do it through cloud permit. It's just, once we get that live, I'd like to be able to just send that report out versus the one he's been doing, because it's just, it's
And
kinda all over the
then
place.
one other request on the code enforcer is if we can have him come to a meeting, like once a month maybe. in case any of us have questions for him.
Let's see.
Thank you.
Okay,
That's it.
let's make sure that he's got his sheet updated. He can send it out, and then we can have him come to the meeting, okay? All right, anything else, Alderman Chun?
No, that's it.
Okay, Alderman Danko,
Nothing right now.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Nothing, thank you.
Alderwoman Inman,
Nothing, thank you.
Alderman Ketchum,
Nothing, thank you.
Alderman Robinson.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Okay, so before you is recommend for approval by our economic developer, Alexi, old business item A. So before you as council is discussion and possible action to revise section 98-145. That's our airport area development of our municipal code. So this takes into effect the recommended height changes that has been requested so we can attempt to develop any of the properties to the west side of the street. Okay, so floor is open for questions or discussion.
Yes. My one concern, even with the paperwork that we got back on March 31st with the drawing and everything, it talks about the, everything between the blue lines should not exceed the 20-1 ratio, which is, I understand the old ratio, but it's the one that we have and we had in our code. And I would still be a little concerned as far as if we change the code and then they build something that they're allowed to build, but it's taller than what this approved, or maybe that's not the right word, but larger than what the state Department of Aviation or whoever it is would allow this to continue as an airport. And that is my concern, because I think, you know, it says that if section 98-145 is removed, the state of Illinois requirements will still need to be required to be shown on the property title work. If the property is to be sold, it's the owner's responsibility to reveal the issue in a real estate document. The other interesting note is that the city can allow someone to build on that site, but if it is too high, the state will shut down the runway and the airport.
So Rich, I don't know exactly what you're looking at, but what we have done and what we're proposing is to have our standards be consistent with the federal aviation guidelines and the state guidelines. The state really doesn't have specific guidelines, they just follow the federal aviation guidelines. And the federal aviation guidelines have all been reduced to the 150 feet, the 15-1 ratio. So it will be in line. Right now, what we do is, ours is more restrictive than what the state and the Federal Aviation Authority requires. So that's what we want to take out, is to not be more restrictive and to just comply with the regulations that are elsewhere.
Do we have that then, yet? What you're talking about, as far as the 150 and everything? Because I'm looking at,
Yeah,
like I said, the original memo that came from Jeff and Don to the mayor and the city council back on the 31st, and it talked about the airport area development and what the issue was, and then the recommendation, but I've not seen anything else afterwards as far as what we're doing about it.
Page 41 of the packet, there's an updated memo.
How many pages were in that packet? Do you remember?
70-something.
76?
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff that gets buried that doesn't even get looked at when there's
Jeff, could
that.
you bring up page 43 from the committee of the whole? There's a map there that I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at.
Okay.
There, that's the one.
Okay. And what we were trying to show here is that these are the different lines that they require. Part of the problem is that when this ordinance was put in place, it was in 1979. At that point in time, the airport was considered a commercial airport. So the intent at the time, I believe, was to be able to make sure that they were protecting the airport by putting this ordinance in. So no one would build too high and risk any shutting down of the airport. Unfortunately, over time with Wood Lake Landing, and then also, as you can see right here with some of these hangars, the approach line actually came within where they were supposed to be. So from what we're understanding from the aviation folks is that when that happened, it could no longer be a commercial airport. And right now, the classification for the Sandwich Airport is a restricted landing area. It means that if somebody's a pilot, they have to get permission to be able to land there. So the folks who are at Wood Lake Landing, they obviously have permission through their homeowners association, but it's not a commercial airstrip any longer. So basically, the difference is that 15-to-1 ratio is what goes with a restricted landing area versus a commercial zone, which would have been a 20-to-1, and that's what was in there. Now, I've talked to Colton Otto on some of the stuff. He helped out with some of it, and we were talking, and there's all different types of ways to look at this because you can see this is the beginning of the asphalt here, right?
Right.
But everything is measured from this line right here where the 26 is because that's the space that's available. So in order to have the length that's required, that's why that line is there. So when a pilot comes in, they're not aiming for this first arrow, they're aiming for this 26 is my understanding. Because that gives them the glide path that they need to be able to get in. So what I was trying to do with the ABCD was just try to give everybody some idea of the difference in heights, and it looks like I left one off for the center of Glutty Road, but the west right-of-way for A is currently at 20-to-1. It's a 14-foot height, okay? And C is approximately a 19-foot height, and then it goes up from there. And this is the difference here. 14 would become 18.66, 19 would become 26.2, 32 would be 43.86. Not to say that we would encourage someone to put something that big there, but the opportunity would be there. And really the part of the reason that this has come up is that I think there's been just a lot of questions about this ordinance because when we talk to the to the State of Illinois Department of Aviation, we can't enforce this. This is in here strictly for guidelines so that we don't accidentally authorize something that's too tall.
And that's my concern is that all of a sudden we change this and now we do accidentally do something. Because if we accidentally do something, which is permits somebody to build something larger than what it's supposed to be, the airport is shut down.
Well, so I think the thing that, what Jeff's trying to say is it's not an airport anymore.
It is an airport.
No,
It's a private airport.
by definition, with the FAA regulations, it's a restricted landing area. And I understand what you're saying, but there are different definitions.
So then they will shut down the restricted,
No, they will not.
I have not seen that anywhere. So
At
let's
the
see all
15
that first, and then maybe I would be able to vote on it.
At the 15-to-1, they wouldn't shut it down because it's a restricted landing area.
Right.
So it'd be up to us as a city to make sure whatever developed on there, that we were responsible for that, to put in there what would meet this as well. That's the conversation I had with Don, is that being mindful of who we attract to that property and other properties there that it fits within this guideline. Keep in mind too, I know that some of you didn't live here or weren't old enough in the 1980s, but this was home to Skydive Sandwich. Every weekend there were people skydiving. There was, I think, a DC-3, maybe as high as a DC-9 that went in and out of there.
It was a DC-3.
And so people were skydiving on weekend. That's when it was an active commercial airport. Now they're in Skydive Chicago and Skydive Ottawa. Matter of fact, the parachute that says Skydive Sandwich is still on their wall if you go there. And it was a very much different airport. And if you lived here long enough, you know there was quite a few aircraft that ended up in the forest preserve that missed the runway. So that's why some of that has changed over time. They've moved to other airports just because it's not the most conducive airport to land and take off on, So I think, Rich, the north part of that is probably where someone will be looking to develop, much where some of the Egg Tech and other buildings are up there toward the 34. And I've talked to Don about making sure that maybe if there's parking, that it's in that yellow zone that's there, so there wouldn't be any height there. And so we're very mindful of what can go there and what might be able to go on the property.
So who owns the property where that A's at? Is that private property? I mean, who would actually build something right in front of the runway?
No one would, but what I was saying is that the glide zone goes up as you get further out. So that was just as an example.
Okay.
That right there, the glide path is currently about 14 feet. That would be the restricted height currently. It would take it up to 18 at this point. Not that anyone would build there, but it was just to kind of give everybody an idea of how it gradually would go up. So.
I think the corner is owned by the Ament family that owned the airport at one time.
Correct.
So between the blue lines now then, what would it should not exceed what, 15-1 then? Is that what it's gonna be?
Well, it's more about going this way. So if you get to E on there, forgive my scrolling, E would take it up to about 43.86 feet in the center of that parcel. So it's primarily just going up from the edge of the runway and
Right.
going up. So when you get out here to F, that's like 39 feet. So, and then there's an east boundary of the property here. Now, obviously and the reason I put these in here is that this is the edge of the property, but there's a 25-foot setback here, so it couldn't go any closer than that. So it obviously couldn't go beyond, in this case, 53 feet.
So you could still put an office building and parking on the property, something that still fits into that footprint and develop it instead of it being empty forever.
But it would have to slope as it
Slope,
goes.
yeah.
But that's to stay in there. Now, I guess there are two options. I mean, Cassandra did get an ordinance to me today. I don't know that I didn't get it out to anybody, but that's something we would bring back. And really, the only change was taking it from the 20-foot glide path down to 15. Our other option, I guess, is to remove it completely, but the problem with that is then it's easy to lose that. And I think that's the point that we're making, is that we don't want to accidentally do something that's going to hurt them. So
That's my concern. I want them to be able to develop,
Absolutely.
but I want them to be able to develop where it's not gonna hurt the airport.
exactly. And what we've been told by the state is that because of where the buildings are, there's not any chance of this coming back as a commercial airport. There's just not the space there.
I go to Midway for that close, just barely missed the fence, landing and takeoff.
Do we have anything in writing from the state stating that they cannot and will not shut it down if it's at a 15-1?
I'd have to ask Don. I don't know. He's been the one in discussion with them.
I don't know that
I think that would simplify things for everybody
I
up
don't
here
think that
if we
they
had
would
something in
give
writing.
that to us.
I don't think so either. They're going to.
But I know that there is an email, I'll have to find it, but where it addresses the fact that, again, and I mean, I wasn't here, I don't know what happened, but whenever those hangars, those things were built, that's when it became a restricted landing area and no longer a commercial airport. So the requirements are different. And, I mean, if you look at the FAA's website, you'll see that this isn't an airport that can be used by anyone without it, they're not on all the channels and everything. You have, like he said, you have to make the specific calls and ask for permission to land. And so I know that there is definitions of the restricted land area, and that's where it says 15-1. And so I found most of this on the FAA's website.
Well, I'm reading a memo that is a conversation with the Regional Department of Aviation Rep. Patrick Schroeder, and the part I highlighted was number 4 of this memo. In the event of a development on the 2-acre parcel at the southeast corner of Gletty and Route 34, we, meaning the city, are not restricted in what is allowed. However, if something that is built that is taller than the private airport restrictions, the state would close the airport. I'm not sure why they refer to it as a private airport or an airport, but he does.
But it's still a 15-1 for what that requirement is.
But it's an airport.
I'm just telling you what the FAA regulations say.
And I'm just telling you what the Department of Aviation Rep. Patrick
Okay.
Schroeder told Don Oleski according to this memo, right? So we should follow what the Department of Aviation is saying, because this is where I think we're gonna get lost in something, because, oh, I thought it was this, and then it wasn't, and we don't have an airport or restricted landing area. Just my thought. I want them to develop, but I want the wording in there so we are 100% protecting the current airport and those residents. Not even my ward, but there are residents.
What is this zoned as, this property? Commercial,
I believe it's B3.
business?
Yeah, I believe it's B3.
Okay, and I'm just asking because I'm not on the zoning, but B3, what is allowed to be built in B3?
Pretty much
Everything.
anything you
Everything?
could dream of.
Okay,
That's what I'm saying. I think it comes down to the city just limiting what could go there, right? Through our planning review and what we would give a permit for.
And the reason this has come up is, you know, what we've encouraged Don to do is go out and try and figure out, okay, what are people trying to do with these properties? And if there is development, we'd like to be able to work with them to market it and be able to bring in somebody who's gonna be a good fit versus letting this just happen. And then that's when we get things that we aren't as fond of that just kind of show up. So I think we want to try and work with the property owners so that hopefully that they can, you know, either sell the property or be able to develop the property. And it comes down to what can they do? I mean, if we want to leave it at 20-1, leave it at 20-1, but that's going to limit what we're able to put there.
Okay, so I hear maybe not enough information. We'll see if we can go back and get some clarity. Or the other option would be to put a special use on that property that just limits it for these types of development. They don't meet it, they don't develop.
I'm not trying to make it more difficult at all, because I want them to develop, but again, I just want to protect what's currently there.
Well, I don't disagree with you at all. That's been the intent from the beginning on this, is trying to figure out, and unfortunately, there's a lot of time that's already gone into trying to figure this out, and it's not an easy thing, otherwise it would have been done, I'm certain. And this came up in 1998, I believe, is when the development got to a point where they lost the commercial airport designation, and then I believe it came back in 2008, and there was a discussion at that point in time. And I think there was some misunderstanding at that point as to what the intent was and why it would happen. Now, this is all secondhand from the guy who owns the property, but, you know, at that point in time, he walked away from it because it was just, there was too much, again, it was probably too hard to figure out. So I just don't want to continue to see a property not be developed in a prime location. Obviously, I don't think it's a good spot for a gas station or something like that, but we want to try and find something that's going to be a good fit for the community, that fits there, that doesn't impact the airport. And we just want to make sure that we can explain very clearly what needs to go there.
I think it'd be great for a restaurant with outdoor seating just to watch whatever lands. Okay, we'll go back to the state and see if we can get some better clarity. Moving on to new business. Before we vote, Karsta, as the chair of the Finance Committee, is this still the correct amount? Okay, thank you. Under new business A, can I have a motion to approve our invoices totaling $116,549.63? This is the amount that's been reviewed and approved by our Finance Committee.
Make that motion.
Okay, Alderman Erickson, is there a second?
second.
Danko? All right, any discussion?
What was the amount? Was it changed?
I have 116, 549, 63.
I thought some things were pulled.
They were, but we discussed them. Which ones are you talking about?
The clover?
There are a couple things, Rich, that we have to deal with some staff, but that number is correct.
Well, I have one that I would have brought up that I thought it was already discussed with staff a while back, but,
With the meal?
yeah, the meals.
That's one of them that were,
I think that occurred before the memo went out to them in our discussion.
What memo?
You asked me to remind them of the per diem rates.
Right.
I did that.
So that had already occurred?
No, I think these charges had already occurred from their events before it went out. Those are from April, I believe, right?
I gotta,
We discussed this the first meeting of May.
sorry, I'm just gotta find the,
I think it's the timing. I think they already spent the money and claimed it before we had our discussion and reminded them
From
of our,
April.
from April, yeah. We discussed it the first meeting in May.
but we haven't approved this yet. It doesn't make a difference of when it was, because basically the thought was is that the wrong thing was being done or interpreted or whatever, but now is when we are approving this. So for a reimbursement, nothing else would have changed other than us saying that we're not going to reimburse for a certain amount. So I guess that's where I'm lost.
My point is they'd already traveled and spent the funds and submitted them for reimbursement. And then we had a discussion and sent it out to them to remind them of what the council position is and their interpretation of the personnel policy. The per meal versus total in a day.
But they would have gotten the same thing. I mean, that's just, they're requesting more than what,
I don't know that all of them were in all cases.
I'm sorry?
I don't think all the meals were over the amount, were they?
No, just 3 of them.
Okay.
But why wouldn't we just pull that amount then?
I'm not on the finance committee. Did you go to the meeting?
No, I didn't make the
Didn't either.
meeting.
I didn't make it.
But I was told it was pulled, and it should have been pulled.
Okay, well, looks like it's not, so. But I did send a memo, like I said I would. Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
No,
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
aye.
Alderman Chun,
No.
Alderman Dankel.
Aye.
Okay.
That's it.
Motion passes. Okay, next one is item B. This is discussion of possible action to approve disposal ordinance 25-04. Council would receive the recommendation by staff to dispose of certain property of the city. So that ordinance is before you for approval.
Just for the record, this is something we need to be doing on a more regular basis. These are just vehicles that we are
Surplusing.
surplusing at this point, and we'll dispose of via auction or what have you. But just want to be able to, we should probably do this every quarter, if not twice a year, just so that we're keeping up with these items.
So these are a 2003 Ford dump truck, 2003 Ford Ranger, 93 International dump truck, and old laptops, printers, monitors, and other miscellaneous electronics. Okay, is there a motion to approve ordinance 2504 for disposal?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, is there a second?
I'll second.
Alderman Chun, any discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Robinson,
aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Dankel,
Aye.
and Alderwoman Inman.
Aye.
Okay, next item is D. This is to convey a portion of Oak Bend that we just discussed for Phase 4 FW LLC.
Actually, we need to do item C first.
Okay, C, this is,
This is actually to declare that parcel as surplus. It's ordinance
is that the same
2505.
ordinance? Oh,
No,
gotcha.
so this is to declare that property as surplus, giving us
Gotcha,
the
gotcha,
authority
gotcha.
to,
Okay. Wish you would have put
dispose
Oak
of it.
Bend on it. Okay, item C is disposal, to declare by ordinance 2505 that the property of Oak Bend Road is surplus. Is there a motion to approve item C?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, is there a second?
Second.
Alderman Danko? Gotcha. Good, gotta get used to your voice, thank you. All right, any discussion on item C, declaring Oak Bend as surplus property? Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Dankel,
Aye.
Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Item D would actually be at this point then to convey the property and that portion of Oak Bend roadway to Phase 4 FWC LLC.
And then I would just ask that the motion be to approve the conveyance of a portion of Oak Bend roadway to Phase 4 FW LLC and authorize the mayor to execute all necessary documents.
Sounds like a much better motion. Anyone like to make it?
And you may say, I make the motion as set forth by the attorney.
I make the motion as set forth by the attorney.
Thank you, Adam. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Janelle. And so it's Arnett and Inman. Any discussion on item D? Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Dankel, Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Annette,
Aye.
and Alderwoman Erickson.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, item E is discuss and possible action to waive the competitive bid for annual sludge hauling agreement. Is there a motion to approve item E?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Alderman Chun, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, any discussion? It's an annual process for us. Okay, hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll to waive the competitive bids process for sludge hauling?
Okay, Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Dankel,
Aye.
Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
and Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Now we're on to F. This is the authorize the mayor to sign the renewal agreement for sludge hauling with Stewart Spreading. This will be an annual permit for us. Is there a motion to approve item F?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Alderwoman Inman, is there a second?
Second.
Alderman Chun, any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Dankel,
Aye.
Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, in similar fashion, item G, discussion and possible action to waive the competitive process for annual manhole lining.
As the council may recall, we did about $80,000 worth of manhole lighting last year. This is to renew with the same company. Sorry, I need to step in.
Okay, and that is Innovative Underground. Is there a motion to waive the competitive bid process for annual manhole lining?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Alderwoman Erickson, is there a second?
Second.
Alderman Ketchum, any discussion?
Yeah, where is this taking place at, like, what part of town, what ward?
A lot of it is Main Street as we're moving along on that process. And, you know, I'll have to get with Brad to get the exact locations because, again, what we did is we did it as a certain number of feet. So it's going to be where, He's got manholes figured out. We had EEI do an assessment a couple years back, and we were able to look at that and identify them and prioritize them. So we're just working through that list.
This keeps us from having a lot of infiltration.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what it is, I just wanna know where about in town is that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, was this a budgeted item?
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes out of the sewer fund. Other questions? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Danko,
Aye.
Alderwoman Inman.
Aye.
And Alderman Robinson.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, so item H will be discussion and action to authorize the mayor to actually enter into the agreement with Innovative Underground for manhole lining services an amount not to exceed $80,000. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Alderman Ketchum? Second.
I'll second.
Alderwoman Erickson? Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Danko,
Aye.
and Alderwoman Inman.
Aye.
Okay. Item H is discuss an action for the temporary license, section 6.48B12. 3 of this municipal code. This will be to grant the Upper House that outdoor event and to close the street in front of the Upper House, which is actually City Hall. It'll be on the portion of Pearl Street between the railroad and the alley. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Alderwoman Erickson, is there a second?
One second.
Alderman Chun. Any discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Danko,
Aye.
Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett,
Aye.
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
and Alderman Chun.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. All right, council has a need to go into executive session under item 14. This will be for personnel under 5 ILCS 2C1, and also be for the discussion of purchase or lease of property under 5 ILCS 2C5 and litigation under 5 ILCS 122C11. Is there a motion to go into closed session for those closed session items?
Motion.
Alderman Arnett, is there a second?
Second.
Whew. Inman, will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderwoman Erickson,
Aye.
Alderman Chun,
Aye.
Alderman Danko, Alderwoman Inman,
Aye.
Alderman Robinson,
Aye.
Alderman Ketchum,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Okay, we'll be in closed session. When we come out, just a reminder, we had table items that we'll take action on.